Hi everybody and welcome to the week 6 lecture. Apologies we couldn't do the live session and it's a day later than usual. For those of you who didn't read on my post, my silly old dog who weighs about 35 kilos pulled me into the car door and I had a concussion, so a few days off there and just trying to get back into it. So thanks for your patience, it's much appreciated. I don't think we'll have a live session next week either, just with Christmas and concerts and kids and lots of things happening in life. It's probably going to be too difficult to try and get a day. We certainly don't want to be doing it near Christmas Eve. So I think I'll just record a session for you as well, and then we'll get back into the live sessions again when we get back from our break. So welcome to week 6. Our focus this week is a little bit, not all over the place, but the focus was on science communication. And when we had a read through of chapter 7, it focused on play-based pedagogy. So I've decided to use that as our sort of flavour to talk about in this lecture today. So having a look at different elements of play-based learning, why it's important, what are the particular stages of play-based learning, and how it relates to science and why play-based learning and science learning can really go beautifully hand in hand because of the nature of science and what it means to be scientific. So let's get started. So what does it mean to be with play-based learning? What does it mean to work with play-based learning, or what is it? So I'm sure this is something that you've come across many a time, and I don't really know what people already know. If we had a way that we could take a little poll, would probably be really good. So if you already know a lot of stuff about play-based learning before, if you've done it in previous subjects, then you probably already know much about it and it probably won't be new learning for you. Although what we are going to try and do is connect it to the science that we've been talking about in this subject and try to make a few links to Assessment 3. Alright, so with play-based learning, obviously it's talking about the importance of play. Now we've seen the importance of play in Reggio, we've seen the importance of play in emergent curriculum, so that's nothing new to us. But we're just going to really analyse that word play and think about what it means to actually be partaking in play-based learning. And these are some of the ideas that they break it down into when they think of the word play. So as it says on the slide, it says that play is a broad term. So what actually does it mean to actually learn through play? So number 1 comes from enjoyment. Now there's nothing stronger in terms of all the educational research talking about how it's really important for kids to to enjoy what it is that they're doing. So enjoyment is really the starting point for learning, because if you're enjoying what you're doing, you are motivated. It's that own intrinsic motivation and willingness and want to learn, which links to point number 3, self-motivating. If a child is driven by what the child wants to do and is considered its own choice. So the idea of engagement, the idea of being self-motivating, and the idea of student voice and agency all sort of link together. Because if a child feels that they're doing something that they enjoy, if they feel like they have had a say, they have had a choice, they are driving what is happening with their own intention and own learning, that is really going to help. Because, engagement in the task is 99% of the problem sometimes with children, particularly in a primary school where the curriculum is dictated to you. But in early years, we have this magical, avenue to be able to really foster this sense of self-motivation, foster a sense of enjoyment. One really interesting point that you can see there when it comes to enjoyment, and that it talks about the fact that Enjoyment doesn't mean that you're having 100% fun all of the time. So sometimes it can become frustrating and face challenges, but it's also can be so enjoyable and so rewarding to be able to face a challenge and then come up with some idea to solve it. And the growth and personal growth and academic growth that's going to come out of facing challenges and having that sense of achievement about your own learning. So as you can see, these are very much entwined. If you enjoy something, it means that you're going to be self-motivated. You've had your own choice about what you would like to do. You're actively involved in what you're partaking in. So a child is actively involved instead of passively taking in information. So we're really trying to move away from adults talking and kids listening to kids listening, deciding, engaging, fostering relationships between people, ideas, problem solving, creative thinking. All of these things come together to really connect well with that action step there. And the last one I haven't mentioned yet is meaning, which is the second dot point back up here. Meaning to a child, their actions have meaning even if they are pretending to play. So as we're going to see over the next couple of slides, there's a lot of cognitive development happening when we can attach meaning to what we're doing. So sometimes maybe people who are not educated in play-based learning sometimes think that play is very random. It doesn't really mean anything. Kids are just moving toys from one side of the room to the other. There's no rhyme or reason to it. But the child will be able to connect meaning to their actions, and particularly when we have a look at things like cooperative play and the explorative play, you'll see that kids playing pretend, and they can see connections to what they're doing is also connected to their outside world. Now, why is this important to science in particular? Because all of these factors really connect well to science learning. I mean, obviously they connect well to any sort of learning, which we've seen, but if we can teach kids science concepts in this way, using kids enjoying it, can they foster a sense of meaning to what they're seeing? Are they self-motivated? Do they have choice? Do they have choice in their actions? Are they actively engaged and not passively? All link beautifully to science learning, because that's where children can become scientists. Children can create that sort of natural curiosity and creativity and wonder and all of these things that we've been talking about for the past 6 or so weeks. So the 5 reasons why play-based learning is best for the development of your child. So what's really the promoting factors about play-based learning? So play shapes the structural design of the brain. It increases brain flexibility and improves potential learning. So if we think about that in terms if we're wearing our science hat, we really need to, when we're exploring science concepts, we need to be able to think critically, to think flexibly, to so many of these STEM ideas are going to have this process of trial and error, exploration, reflection and revision, and we need to be able to have a brain that allows us to think like that. If we're actively engaging in our learning in science, we are not passively listening. We are engaging. We are thinking critically, like we said before. So we need a brain that's able to do that. And if play helps us to do that and makes it fun and engaging for kids and they want to partake in these science lessons, then that's probably half the battle won already. Children test and develop motor skills, promoting significant health and well-being. And we'll talk about that over the next couple of slides too, where we have a look at some of the real physical benefits of play-based learning in terms of having connections to things like connecting with people and emotions and language skills, motor skills, and then the more sort of scientific-based skills as well. Play assists with the development of social competence, and that's what we just talked about. Children build relationships, resolve conflict, negotiate, and regulate their behaviour. Think about how important that is to science learning. We don't learn scientific concepts very well on our own. Even students in high school are going to get together in groups to experiment, to test, to say, oh, hey, that didn't work. Let's talk about it in our team and see if anyone else can come up with any ideas. Let's test your theory. That didn't work. So it's a real collaborative process. The idea of science and STEM sort of concepts need that relationships. You need to have be able to work as a team. And that's really important in all aspects of science learning throughout all the levels of school. So let's get children as young as possible in our centres really building these skills from this age up, because if we can start the process of building skills, these negotiation skills and behaviour regulation skills, it's only going to set them ahead once they get to primary school. They will already be on track to do these things once they get to foundation, and once they move through primary school, they will be better at these things, because all of these things are practice. You need to be able to do them with people to be able to develop those skills. That's why they're called skills. Social skills are skills that need to be learnt. You need to have avenues to learn them, and science learning in a play-based manner is really important. Play creates dispositions for learning, curiosity, resilience, concentration, and creativity. Isn't that a beautiful one when we reflect on it in terms of science? Science is curiosity. And if play is creating a disposition for learning that fosters a creative element in your brain, then that is wonderful, because it's going to aid your imagination. It's going to aid your creativity. When you're thinking of a design for your building structure, you're going to have a plethora of ideas rather than being really limited and really focused. If you've got an adult talking to you about how the world works and your level of engagement is that you need to listen, your creativity suffers, your curiosity suffers, your engagement suffers. So we really want to be fostering these ideals, which connect so heavily to science learning through play. Playing allows opportunities for empathy as children explore and understand the point of view. So that links beautifully with social competence. So as well as the academic learning skills of science, like the curiosity and wonder, we're also developing social skills. Now let's have a look at the stages of play. Now in your reading in chapter 7, it talks a little bit about Piaget and how we all know about Piaget's cognitive theory, but there were also the stages of play, and in terms of functional play and the ones that they mentioned in the reading. And then they go on to talk about these are more stages of play in terms of the age of the child and what type of play it is, and then where it fits into child development theory. Now, I've just popped this slide in just so we could see in terms of the ages which play type is going to match with what kind of age we're looking at. So first off, we've got solitary, which we'll have a look at over the next few slides, which is most evident in the children 0 to 2. We've got this one calls it spectator, which not sure if we had that in the other one. But spectator means that you're just observing those around you, and that's of 2 and 2.5-year-olds. We've got parallel play, which I'm sure many of you have heard of before. And then we move into associate play and cooperative play. But in our next few slides, I've decided to use the ones in the reading rather than the ones from this particular list. So let's have a look at solitary play. What's important about solitary play? So what are the characteristics of it? So obviously we can learn from the heading, and I'm sure that you've heard of this before, and it's obvious that it's when children will not be playing with others, they'll be playing on their own, and it's with minimal social contact. what's really important about these little guys. So we're thinking about solitary play in 0 to 2 and how important it is to really build that independence. So we've got our little ones with us and we hold them and we play with them and we connect with them and we build that relationship. Whereas now it's time to start popping them down and giving them some toys and really giving them their own sense of self in the world and their own sense of connection. So it's really helping children to begin to be independent and then even to persevere with tasks that might be a little bit difficult. So there might be a little baby, maybe a 10-month-old, sitting on the carpet with some blocks that go into, one of those little block frames, and then you try and put the triangle through the little hole and the circle through the hole, and something like that might be difficult, but it's really building up the sense of perseverance and learning and so much, just moving the toy and monitoring how it works and really developing that sense of self and sense of the world. And obviously there's going to be a lot of scientific content that a child at that age would be learning, but obviously they're not aware of that. Let's try and link this back to A3. Now we are obviously going to be focusing on 3 to 5 year olds, so we wouldn't want to really see much solitary play used in our A3. However, we are focusing on 3 to 5 year olds, so I don't think we're going to see much of this solitary play, and probably when we get to children of that age, we are expecting them to have moved on further through these stages of play. Obviously, there's always time for solitary play, and sometimes kids just need a little bit of time out and time to explore things on their own, so we're definitely not saying that older children don't benefit from it, but it's just as a part of your project for A3, we want to be developing those relationships and developing those social contacts and developing science context through discussion and critical thought with others. So bear that in mind when you're planning your learning sequence. I'm sure that you've all heard of parallel play, and I'm not going to talk too much about it because it is in the reading and I'm sure that you know about it already, but just in case you don't, parallel play can lead from solitary play, and it involves children playing alongside each other with little or no social interaction. So you've probably all seen the kids that seem to play obviously parallel to each other. So they're playing alongside or near each other, but they're not actually playing together. I know I used to see this a lot when I went to my daughter's kinder, and you might see a child, say, in the home corner, and one of the children is making a cup of tea and another one sitting at the table, maybe pretending to eat a bowl of soup. But they're not actually, they're both in the home corner and they're both engaging in their own elements of play, but they're not actually talking together. The person making the tea is not asking the other person if they want some or trying to sort of emulate what they see in real life. So although they are playing together, as in alongside, they're not actually interacting. So how does this connect to one other thing I wanted to mention was watching and imitating. So in our reading it talked about the fact that with parallel play it can sometimes lead to one child watching a particular child and then doing what they do as well. Parallel play can be a tricky one in terms of science concepts because, again, we're looking for that connection to creative thought. We're looking for that connection to curiosity and trial and error and discussion. So there might be sometimes you might notice that some of the children in the group are watching or imitating, and I suppose as an educator it would be us who sort of engages that child and perhaps asks them some questions or see how they can perhaps engage with them to move them from parallel play into the next area of play or the next benefit of play, which is cooperative play. Now this is primarily what we want to see in our learning sequence. Again, nothing wrong with solitary and nothing wrong with parallel if it's in a correct context or if that's what the child needs. It can work in there, but primarily we want to see kids working in these project groups. We want to see them cooperating and collaborating. So cooperative play is a more sophisticated social development. It's a characteristic of the target group that we are actually looking at between those sort of 4 and 5 year olds. And it's an extended form of developed collaborative play, and it's enhancing social interaction. So it actually requires higher levels of social interaction, and it actually requires higher level of cognitive thought that's most likely embraced with the notion that if we are in a team, if we do have to discuss, if we do have to question, if we do have to clarify, if we do have to think critically, if we do have to problem solve, all of these elements of collaborative play, pushing us to do these things, because we're not just sitting and listening and participating passively, all of these elements are going to enhance your academic focus, are going to improve cognitive development and have higher levels of learning of the science concepts. Remember, we talked about in the very beginning of this that these elements of play really lend themselves very well to science, because science is critical thought, and science is learning through trial and error, and science is experimenting. So we want to see the kids doing these things. We want to see them negotiating. We want to see them engaged in teamwork, discussing, listening, thinking, reflecting, challenging. And we're working together towards this aim. So really pushing those elements of collaborative play within your learning sequence in A3. Does it mean that I have to talk about collaborative play specifically in Assessment 3? No, but it might just be something that you just bear in mind, that we really want to foster these relationships with our science learning. So it's important that we are fostering relationships, and we're really trying to build a bond between team members. I think it was in a reading a few weeks ago where they talked about, they looked at the team at the beginning of the project is just some random kids who might have an interest in seeing if something floats. And then by the end of the project, they had actually developed their own sense of each other as friends. And that wasn't because the teacher was pushing that kind of agenda, but it just happens naturally, obviously, because the more time you spend with people, you are going to develop that friendship, and you are going to develop a relationship, and you are going to develop a sense of empathy for each other. So spending time together in cooperative situations are going to foster that. And using science learning is a great way to do it. I always say this wrong. Epitesmic play. I had to write it down phonetically because I always say it wrong. Epitesmic play is something that we see so often in terms of play. And it's really looking at thinking about how kids can use their prior knowledge, which we've talked about a lot with science learning already and how that's super important, but also how it can parallel things which are happening in real life. And when I was having a look around through some of the research about epitesmic play, it talks about things like, there was an example of a computer game, and this computer game was called Planning the City or Urban Planning or something like that. And the kids go into the computer and they actually get to plan out a city, much like a real urban planner or an architect would do in real life. And apparently the program's very similar to ones that adults would use in real life. And one of the interesting questions from this was, how come kids just don't use Minecraft or Sims or something like that? And they were saying, no, that this game was an example of epitesmic play because it really modelled itself on real life. So modelling something or having a play at something in real life is really important to a child's development. They use what they see and they use it as a play tool. So like these children here are playing doctors and nurses, kids play mums and dads, kids play, working in an office, building outside. So there's so much examples of this type of play that parallels what kids see in real life. And it's using what they already know and they're interested in, because if mum is a doctor and they see that mum has a white coat and they see her with a stethoscope, they're going to want to emulate that. They're going to want to pretend to be her or pretend to be people that they know in real life. So how can we use this in terms of our science learning? Well, using prior knowledge might be a good start for a provocation, perhaps, if you're looking for some sort of scientific sort of avenue to go down. If you haven't chosen one yet, you can make parallels to kids' real life and see if there's any sort of scientific area or things that they might know from things that have happened to kids in their actual real life setting. Last one is exploratory play, and it's so lovely because exploratory play is the messy play, noisy play, yummy and smelly play, because it's a play that involves using all of the senses. They will examine objects by looking, touching with their hands and mouths, probably the more little ones, listening and moving it to learn and how they can influence the world around them. And this type of play includes sand, water, and just messy play, which sounds absolutely brilliant to me. Imagine all the senses just getting so stimulated there. How does this connect to science? Well, science is messy. It's not meant to be something that is just talked about and shown. Sometimes I used to not so much cringe, but we'd have, say, like incursions at school, and they'd be science-based, absolutely brilliant, but someone up the front would come and talk to the kids and they'd show them, and you'd have 30 kids all trying to sit around this one test tube to see this little puff of smoke that would come out or this little reaction happen. And obviously it is an incursion and they can't provide for everyone all the time, but ideally, how much are the kids learning just by 30 kids watching one test tube or watching one reaction or watching one thing? Really exploring things for yourself and making meaning for things yourself is going to be much more powerful as a learning tool if we can foster that with our science learning. So how can you build in, and maybe this is something that you can reflect on if you have your learning sequence together, or maybe if you've done some of the sequence but you don't know where to go next, is really thinking about how you can involve all of your senses. So have you had an opportunity for kids to be messy and get in the dirt and really explore things, or use water or use sand or use different materials in their room? How can you really engage with each of those four senses? And science again lends itself beautifully to this type of play, because we have so many things occurring with science. We have things that we can see. We can see reaction and change. We can hear things. We might hear that when we let go of the balloon, it goes pop, and we can hear that. So science learning and science experimentation is going to lend itself well to all of the senses, engaging all of the senses, and just seeing where kids take it. So do you have some elements of using the senses, or do you have some elements of exploratory play through your learning sequence for A3? So what's some things just to reflect on before we finish up for this week is, we don't want to make it all about assessments all the time, but just reflecting on assessment 3, some key questions. So how can you ensure that your learning sequence allows for children to have time to play? Play in different ways. So do you have exploratory play that lets kids use a lot of different senses, the visual, the auditory, the spatial awareness, the messy touch, moving, lots of different senses engaged? Do you have them collaborating in sort of forms of cooperative play? Sometimes children need to be solitary. Sometimes they need time to reflect. Sometimes they need time to, or want time to do things on their own. Remember that the really valuable point at the very beginning of this presentation was to allow kids agency. So do they have time to reflect if they want to? How do these ideas around play link to science concepts? Well, they fit in beautifully because we know that science is all about pushing the creativity, pushing the idea of problem solving, experimentation, hypothesizing, wondering, questioning, and all of these sorts of things are going to be engaged through play and engaged through exploration. And kids need time to explore things. So by linking play and having lots of opportunities for kids to play in different ways is really going to enhance that science learning. Thanks for listening so much. I'm going to put another video together for next week just because I think it's bit tricky to schedule a live lecture so close to Christmas. So I'll put together another video for you for next week, and then we'll be back to our normal schedule in the new year. See you next week.